All right, and I'm back. This is the Christmas show, so to speak, or the Winter Solstice show on December 25th, 2023. I'm talking with my daughter, Molly, who is soon going to be 20 years old. For those of you who used to listen to me when I had a talk show, you remember Molly when she was, I think the first time I had her on a program, she was 4 years old, reading the Latka Who Couldn't Stop Screaming, and then The Night Before Christmas, and other fun stuff when you were a little kid. Oh, my God, that just on the one hand, seems like a million years ago. This is true with any parent. It seems like a million years ago, but it also seems like it was last weekend. But here she is, finishing up her second year in college with her double major of environmental science and politics, and possibly law school. It's been talked about when the basic college education is finished. But anyway, we're talking just about anything that pops up. This is not a scripted program. As you know, the Malloy podcast never is. It is more like a potpourri, a smorgasbord, a cafeteria, just whatever's available.
Maybe even an improv show.
There you go. That's even better. We were talking right before the break about this rise of Trumpism, MAGA crap. And I've said many times on the podcast, Molly, that to me it goes back to the Reagan years, which is, of course, before you, but the Reagan years when Ronald Reagan invited into government, at least in advisory capacity, and then into policy capacities, Christians, the Christians who were active and promoting this fire and brimstone kind of Christian crap, like Jerry Falwell and people like that, were invited to help set U.S. policy. And even back then, that was when I had first started. I hadn't even gotten into radio yet. I was still working at CNN. But even then, I knew that this was a slippery slope, that once you allow, and the framers knew this, that's why we had the First Amendment, but once you allow religion into a position of authority and power, that begins to signal the end. And there's a very simple reason. And I've said this to my audience before, Molly, that when you have religious fanatics running government, they can do anything they want to do, whether it's domestically or internationally, for a simple reason. They have the power of God behind them.
Right.
So whatever they do has been mandated by their God. If it means invading another country and slaughtering everybody,
right,
like the ancient Hebrews did, fine, do it. That's what God tells you to do. If it means firebombing Dresden or dropping nuclear weapons on Japan, yeah, go ahead, do it. That's what, now I realize that that's not singularly true about how we responded to Germany and Japan during World War II, but it's that same idea. I have the power, and no pun intended, but by God, I'm going to use it.
Right.
And then they do. So theocracy, let's maybe shift a little bit into that. I'm going to get your opinion on that, because Trump has no more belief in a religious deity or religious philosophy than I do have a belief in him. I mean, it's impossible. Mm-hmm. But Trump has worked even the religious nutcases, and they're working him. I mean, talk about a symbiotic relationship that spells death for the country. Why are Christians so willing to follow some asshole like Donald Trump?
Why is anyone? That's one question that I just draw such a blank on, because
I mean, it's understandable about Hitler and Mussolini.
Right. Especially
Hitler. We're coming out of a global depression.
Right.
Germany had been decimated after World War I by reparations.
Right.
And so Hitler's rise is almost understandable, although his policies and what he did,
no, of course,
constituted the most horrible situation I think we've seen in modern times, maybe in all time. But Trump didn't come during a depression. He didn't come during the United States having its ass kicked, unless you consider Vietnam. Trump was just a punk, a jerk,
That's
a liar.
The thing. I think it all comes down to what I was talking about in the first segment about fear mongering, and it's just playing into people's fears, and you don't have to believe the message you're running on as long as the people who are going to vote for you do. He doesn't have to necessarily, I mean, like he'll appeal to black voters by telling him he's on their side. He'll appeal to gay voters by saying he's on their side, and he's not.
What he said during the 2016 campaign, when he said to black vote for me because what do you got to lose?
Right.
Remember that expression? Well, what do you got to lose?
And Joe Biden's platform, he said to the black voters, like, if you don't vote for me, you ain't black. It's just, it's all so much political craziness. And it's just, it shows in this day and age, you don't have to run on your personal beliefs. It's complete political show, TV. Like, it's just appealing to persuasion. It's not actually things you believe in. It goes all the way back to Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton. When Aaron Burr was running against Jefferson, he had no platform. He was very secretive, and Jefferson won because nobody really liked his beliefs, but at least he was outspoken about them. And you see that all the way until today. Trump doesn't necessarily believe in what he runs in, but he's, by God, going to be vocal about it, and he's going to make people think he believes it. He doesn't care that once he gets into office, he's not going to fulfill any campaign promises, because by that point, he's already there. He's set. He's home free. And he knows at this point, he really truly knows that he's gotten enough people who will worship his every word. I tell my friends this all the time. There will be people for the rest of their lives who write in Donald J. Trump on their ballots because they worship him. They believe he should be the only president of the United States. And it's terrifying, and it's propaganda based, but it's the point that we've gotten to.
Well, that's what's so hard for me to get a grasp on, because as you know, I am an old man, and as I look back over the course of my life, the political course of my life, and not just the things I was involved in, but the political course of this country, the political course of the global community, and I see example after example after example that we should have learned from and didn't.
Right.
I mean, when you get right down to it, about 80 or 90 million people died in the 40s to defeat fascism. And yet here it is.
And we're bringing it back.
Ready to bloom in the land of the free, the home of the brave. What makes the soil in this country so fertile where it concerns fascism? And I try to explain my way out of that question by saying I believe it has something very profoundly essential to do with religion.
Right.
The Christian religion. All three Abrahamic religions, because they teach a top-down power structure where the person at the top is Big Brother.
Yeah.
The person at the top, God to these people, will determine if you live or die, if your kid gets cancer, if you're die in a car smash up on your way home for Thanksgiving.
God's will. It's God's will.
God's will, God's will, God's will. So having been brought up with that, and what you mentioned earlier, the fear of questioning, if you so much as question,
you're blasphemous.
Well, yeah, and you're going to burn in hell forever. Yeah. So along comes this monster, Trump. And it's like the Christians, and maybe some Jews and Muslims too, I don't know, but the Christians primarily, it's like they have been looking for the Messiah.
Right.
And we get the Antichrist,
right,
and they make him president.
And that's the thing I couldn't understand even when I was 12 years old and he was running. And the Christians run on this party of purity and uppityness and holiness. And then here comes this sexual abuser who speaks with locker room talk and doesn't care who he offends as long as he gets his point across, barely. And they love him? What? It's the party of hypocrites. It's all hypocrite. And it's really disheartening to see as a young person who the fate of this country is going to rest on these next 4, 8, 12 years in these, no offense to you, in these old men who haven't gotten their head...
Old white men.
Yeah, old white men who don't understand progress or can't comprehend a world that's not individualistic, that promotes actual, like, looking at humanity as one thing, that if we're going to live past another 55 years, we need to band together instead of driving each other apart.
Well, that brings me to the other thing I wanted to ask you about. Your opinion, since it's your one of your fields of study,
right,
is, the whole issue of climate change, global warming, environmental issues. everything I see, everything I read tells me that we've gotten way past the tipping point. And I don't like to think that because I have children, like you're one of them. I have grandchildren. And I think about all the people like me who have children and grandchildren, and we don't, even though we'll be dead and gone, when these targeted dates start to occur, the mere thought of thinking about the planet burning up or the oceans rising or, oh my God, it just makes me crazy.
I've thought a lot about this past semester of school. I've dealt with a lot of different courses that concern climate fatalism. And it's really interesting because at my school, very, very few people are from the South. And we have class discussions where we talk about the people in our lives who don't care about climate change or that we interact with that don't care about global warming. And the perspectives all of my friends from the North and the West and the Midwest come from is, oh yes, I hear people talking all the time about how it just doesn't concern them. They're not very political. They'll leave it to people, scientists who can think about it. Where I'm coming from it, and I say people in the South genuinely believe if climate change is real, it's God's punishment for us and the righteous will be raptured and saved, or they just straight up believe the politicians that say it's completely a hoax. And everybody around me is like, Molly, what people actually think like that? And it's like, oh yes, they do. And I am very privy to that. Now I'm in my little bubble in Atlanta of progressive thought, but I'm in the larger cage of the South where I believe that the South has been a very significant place of radical change, but it's always gonna be characterized, as long as we stay like this, by the racists and the climate deniers and the bigots, and that's just the reputation we're gonna continue having if we don't do something about it. Now, I'm saying that as Georgia's now a purple state, but who knows what it's gonna be.
It's very tenuous purple, too.
Right. Joe Biden was the first blue since Jimmy Carter, right? So it's been a while, but the thing
climate change.
Right. The thing that makes me feel a little better, I've read a lot of political theory this semester, yes, but I've also interacted with a lot of scientific climate scientists and ecologists research. And the overwhelming idea that is presented is that we're not doomed. There are ways to save us. And we're absolutely not taking them, and we're not listening to scientists, but we're not fatally doomed. And if my generation, not our generation, my generation latches onto that and really internalizes it and works towards that future, we're not going to explode ourselves and burn up. Things are going to get worse. We've ruined we've put so much carbon into the atmosphere that, peripheral countries have been destroyed and will continue to be bombarded way before it reaches the
tipping point.
Yeah. But there's a means of stopping it. We've gotten to a point where it's going to get worse before it gets better, but it's not an end-all be-all that we've destroyed ourselves. And that's something that's really helped me deal with my own climate anxieties.
But all right, speaking about your anxieties, what about this idea of the feedback loop that we've already got started now with global warming, which is increasing? For example, just one example, it removes the ice from the polar regions, which allows the more energy from the sun to be absorbed into the water, which changes the temperature of the water, which melts more ice, which brings in more sunlight into the dark water. It's a feedback loop.
Oh, yeah, and not to add more anxiety to the fire, but there's even talk of ancient bacteria that's been frozen in these ice caps that will now be released onto the world.
Well, into peat moss. You remember when we were when we were in Ireland, went to that little museum we found alongside the road between a couple of villages in Ireland, and it was excuse me, they had a demonstration. They had a demonstration and a lot of optics about peat moss in Ireland, how people used to cut it and burn it in their homes for heating and for cooking, and how laws were passed by the Irish Parliament to stop the cutting of the bog and peat moss because it was releasing methane.
Right.
And they were discovering it was releasing bacteria and viruses that had been frozen for thousands of years in a state of suspended animation. All of a sudden, this stuff is... I mean, dear God,
Right,
when you
it's
start
terrifying.
thinking about that.
Well, that's the thing. Conservation needs to begin with restoration ecology, especially wetlands ecology.
Yeah, I've just been hearing about that. Restoration
Yes,
ecology.
restoration
yeah.
ecology. My environmental science professor that I had this past semester is a leading restoration ecologist in her field. She's brilliant. I love her. And she tells us it all starts with soil. It all comes back to wetlands. Wetlands and soil can hold everything. They're a carbon store. They enhance the health of the entire ecosystem that they occupy. And if we're not going to cut back on carbon emissions, the least we can do is start restoring places that have already been destroyed by human activity. And it works. It's an effective means of conservation and ecological health.
What was that thing you were telling me about some time ago, I think on your last trip home, about plant consciousness, everything connected.
Fungi.
Fungi, yeah.
Yeah.
Tell me some more about that.
Well, the thing that I find really interesting is that I didn't learn about that in my environmental science class. I learned about it in my Earth-Born Democracy class, which was a politics course, about the origins of democracy and how it started as coal miners started democracy because they had these intricate relationships with each other that they were able to block all means of capitalist production by democratically elected sit-ins and unions and boycotts. And the course eventually got bigger and bigger and out of the Anthropocene into plant networks and how there's a whole democracy of plant life. And fungi, when it comes right down to it, all life on Earth is controlled by fungi. And we learn about them just as, oh yeah, they're the decomposers in the ecosystem. They're given a very kind of flippant role when really they connect everything. Trees, one tree will be starting to die and the fungi at its roots will alert all the other trees that it's not getting enough sunlight. Those trees will in turn start to grow away from the dying tree so it gets more sunlight.
That just sounds like what?
I know.
What are you talking
it's
about?
all completely true. And there was one where an insect, like a wasp or an aphid that is eating the leaves of a tree, or like an aphid, yeah, that's eating the leaves of a tree, will start to kill the tree. The fungi notices this, and then all the other trees in the area start producing a pheromone that attracts wasps that eat the aphid, and it brings these wasps over, and now the aphids die and the trees can grow again.
But we're disturbing that network, aren't we?
It's hard to say. Any ecological destruction is going to destroy the inherent networks that are present in there, what some ecologists call the wood wide web, which I think is funny. Yeah.
W-O-D?
Yeah, wood.
The wood
because
wide
they're all
web.
talking. It's just like the internet, but for plants.
Well, when you told me this it kind of staggered my credulity for a minute. And I remember we were out in the woods.
Yes, yeah.
When you were telling me about this, we went for a walk in the woods, and you were telling me that. Now, I think the way it started, I mentioned something about trees communicating, and I was aware of that from what I'd read. And then I had my own personal experience, as
Right.
you know about, with trees talking to me. But then you took it to the next level and said, well, it's bigger than that, Dad.
Oh, yeah.
It's that funguses or fungi have the basic communication system of, I think you said, all life on Earth, at least.
Oh, absolutely. Well, because I've known my whole life through you and through just my own studies that trees communicate with each other, because they teach you that in biology freshman year of high school. They say, oh, trees talk to each other, and you go, how? And they go, moving on from that. And we never, and I never really knew why, and I could have Googled it, but it was just something that was never at the forefront of my thought. Why? How do the trees talk? I was just like, oh, they do, and that's cool. Moving on. But this semester we really explored, because the whole class was kind of centering on how do we envision a democracy of earth-born species? What if a river had political rights, sort of thing? It sounds very kind of hippy-dippy, but it was really grounded in a lot of advanced political theory. I found it fascinating. But we learned that the way the trees talk, it's through fungi. That's how flowers communicate. That's how any plant life couldn't have ever lived on Earth and out of water if it wasn't for the symbiotic relationships they made with fungi hundreds of millions of years ago. Everything was just floating in the abyss until fungi came along and said, oh, you want to go on land? Let's communicate. I'll be the roots, you grow up. And that's how they developed chlorophyll.
I just saw something about that on The Earth, Richard Attenborough's...
David Attenborough.
David Attenborough's
I love him.
program. Yeah, that whole series, and that was one of the things they were talking about.
Right.
How life moved from the sea to the ground, and it required the link of fungus to make it happen. And I'm sitting there watching this thing, Molly. I'm thinking, what the hell? What are they talking about?
No way.
But you came up in a political science class?
Yep. Yeah, no, and it was fascinating because we were really exploring how humanity could distance itself from an individualist mindset and turn to fungi, because this is what we discussed in humanity very much as how can we interact with somebody where we both get the best situation here. Maybe I get off a little better than this guy. Plants don't operate like that. Fungi are just doing things because of their inherent instinctual urge to do it. Fungi, not everything a fungi does is symbiotic. Fungi helping the tree doesn't necessarily help the fungi, but it does it anyway. It's very much like a collective consciousness rather than a...
You're telling me that funguses have an altruistic attitude?
Altruistic is a human concept. That's the thing we talked about. It's scientists are like, why do fungi do this if they don't get anything good out of it?
Right.
Not necessarily true, and it's also very, like, sometimes a tree will grow in a way that makes the fungi healthier. There you go, the fungi's won. Sometimes the fungi isn't affected at all, but it does it anyway. And if humans, like, consider why that is and how we could apply that to our own lives, then maybe we wouldn't be killing each other all the time.
Sounds like Buddhism to me.
Yeah, or maybe even a little bit of communism, like just maybe prioritizing others instead of just yourself.
Well, all right, here's a $64 question. And I think you and I have talked about this before, but you're 19 and a half. If you were to live an average normal life, given the length of time that your ancestors have lived, you will probably be around for another 65 or 70 years. And we only have about a minute and a half left. What do you foresee is going to happen? You've got to have some kind of a vision, do you not, about how things are going to work out or how they're going to evolve or change?
Well, I have a best case scenario and a worst case scenario.
Okay.
Worst case scenario starts next November when Trump's elected. But I mean, to the best of my ability, I believe in my generation, I believe in scientists, and I believe that humanity as a collective doesn't want to destroy itself. And that's something that it's a very selfish thought where things have to get a lot worse before we are like, oh shit, we got to make things better sort of thing. But it might be the case. We might have to watch entire civilizations get destroyed by the effects of climate change before we get our shit together and fix it. But maybe not. Maybe we listen to science before that point. I'm trying to keep a positive worldview. It's hard.
What about your friends, your peers?
My peers and I, we're all on the same page. But again, I'm coming from a place where everybody has the exact same political beliefs and thoughts on believing science. Not the whole country isn't like that. But, younger voters are not voting more than they normally do, but they're voting bluer, which I believe means that they believe in science and they're scared about the future. They're scared about what a Republican future would mean for our entire generation. And I'm a huge advocate of voter advocacy. That was my entire Gold Award project, getting younger people registered to vote in as high numbers as possible, because I really do believe my generation sees it like it is. We're not caught up in Fox News propaganda or the Republican Party's online dissemination of information to confuse us. We're trying to look at facts as they are. Younger people are going to college in higher numbers. So I'm cautiously optimistic because the alternative is just being racked with anxiety at all hours.
Right. All right. Well, this was very interesting. I don't know that I learned anything new about you in this discussion, but as a matter of fact, it's almost like reiterating some of your points of view that I've become familiar with. But it's interesting to me, as your old man, to see how you have advanced just in the time that you used to do Christmas shows with me on talk radio. It's amazing. All right. I'm going to leave it there. Hi, Truth Seekers. Mike Malloy here. The Progressive Voices Network brings you commercial-free commentary from today's leading progressive radio hosts and pundits, like me, Mike Malloy, 24 hours a day. I'm not your typical old guy from the 80s or the 90s talk radio host, and Progressive Voices is not your typical talk radio network. It's a listener-supported nonprofit with no corporate control whatsoever over our broadcast. So hosts like me, Mike Malloy, are free to rant and scream and carry on about whatever we like. We're often controversial, but we're never boring. Weeknights, 9 p.m. in the East, 6 p.m. in the West on the Progressive Voices Network. Always progressive, always on. I'm Mike Malloy. Keep it lit.